It was supposed to be a fresh start. I had just moved into this house a few weeks ago, settling into a quiet neighborhood. The kind of place where you don't hear much from anyone, where the streets are calm and life seems simple. I didn't really interact with the neighbors much, just went about my business, unpacked my things, and thought I'd found my peaceful corner of the world. I had no reason to think anything was off, not at first anyway. But everything changed one night. I had just fallen asleep, drifting off into the kind of deep sleep you only get when you're exhausted from moving. Then, suddenly, I was jolted awake. There was a noise, faint at first, but unmistakable. It was coming from the kitchen. I lay there for a moment, straining to listen. It sounded like tapping, soft, rhythmic. But it didn't stop there. It quickly grew louder, like something or someone was moving around in the kitchen. My heart started pounding in my chest. I sat up slowly, my eyes darting around the dark room, my mind racing. Was it just the house settling, or was someone in the house? I was frozen for a moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then the noise came again. This time, much clearer. Someone was definitely in there. My legs felt like jelly as I got out of bed and tiptoed toward the kitchen. I crept to the door, my breath shallow, and just before I opened it, I glanced through the window. That's when I saw it's someone, a shadowy figure, darting out the window. It all happened in a flash. I didn't see their face, just a silhouette disappearing into the night. I stood there, frozen. My mind screamed that it had been a break-in, but why hadn't I heard anything before? Why had they left so quickly? I couldn't explain it, and for the rest of the night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I stayed up, eyes wide, listening to the silence, but that silence felt wrong now. Whatever had happened, I felt it deep in my bones. I wasn't alone in this house. The next morning, I searched every room, every corner, every closet. Nothing was out of place. But something lingered in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever or whatever had been in my kitchen hadn't gone far. Days passed, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. They just escalated. It wasn't just noises anymore. Things started going missing. Small things at first: keys, a pair of earrings, a spoon I'd just used, but it didn't make sense. I would swear I had just put something in a drawer or on the counter, and then, an hour later, it would be gone. And it wasn't just items vanishing, it was the way they moved. Things would be shifted around. A book in one place, then in another. A dish moved slightly from where I left it. I thought I was losing my mind. I checked every room, every drawer, but it wasn't until one afternoon, while pacing through the house, that I looked up and noticed something I hadn't before. The attic door. I don't know why it took me so long to notice it. Maybe I didn't want to. The attic felt like the kind of place you avoid unless you absolutely had to go up there. But something told me I needed to see what was hidden up there. Something was off about this house, and the attic was the one place I hadn't checked. With my heart in my throat, I climbed the stairs. The air grew colder the closer I got to the top. The attic was dark, dust particles floating in the dim light from the small window. The floor creaked beneath my feet as I stepped inside. At first, I thought it was empty, but then, in one corner, I saw something: old furniture, an old blanket, some discarded items. It was clear someone had been living up there. Someone had left their things behind. A shiver ran down my spine. I took a step closer. The blanket was old, greasy in places, and there were broken pieces of furniture scattered about. A chair, with a leg missing, a dirty rug, some empty bottles. It looked like the remnants of someone who had been living there long before I moved in. But who? Why hadn't they left? That's when I pulled out my phone. I started searching through the Airbnb records for this house, desperate for an explanation. There had to be something in the history of this place that made sense of all the strange happenings. When I checked the records, something caught my eye. The previous tenant had never checked out. There was a gap in the records. The checkout date was just marked as none. No end date. That couldn't be right, could it? My stomach sank as I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. How could that be? It didn't make sense. What did this mean? Had the previous tenant just disappeared? The fear set in deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. Not in any real sense. I thought I could feel it in my bones, the presence of someone still here, somewhere. The house felt wrong, like the air had thickened, like something was watching me. And that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sounds started again, the tapping, but it wasn't just tapping this time. There were other noises, two scratching sounds, muffled footsteps, and then the screams. I could hear them, faint but unmistakable, from outside my door. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrambled to turn on all the lights. I tried to drown out the noise, but it was no use. I couldn't shake the feeling that the previous tenant was still in the house, somewhere. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over. I could feel it. Whoever had lived here before me hadn't left, and they never would. I had rented a cabin through Airbnb for a long weekend getaway to the mountains. The reviews were glowing. People praised how clean and comfortable the place was, how peaceful and beautiful the surroundings were. Most of the feedback was just lovely, but there was one review that stood out to me. It wasn't necessarily bad, but it was strange, and it stuck with me. Pay attention to the window at night. At first, I brushed it off as a weird, maybe even paranoid, warning from someone who was a little too sensitive. After all, people tend to get scared of unnecessary things, right? I was going to be just fine. I tried to ignore it and told myself I'd probably be overthinking it. The first night there was perfect. The cabin was exactly as described, clean, cozy, and with a view that was absolutely breathtaking. I spent the evening sitting by the window, gazing at the stars, and feeling completely at peace. I even remember thinking that I had made the right choice in picking this place. But as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something outside, just like the review had warned about. A shadow passed quickly by the window. It was gone before I could make sense of it, and when I looked closer, I couldn't see anything there. Probably the wind, I told myself, brushing it off. I went to sleep, but that lingering unease started to settle in my gut. The second night was different. I was lying in bed, trying to drift off, when I saw the shadow again. This time, it was slower, almost deliberate. I watched it pass by the window, but when I looked outside, there was nothing there. Again, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe something outside that I couldn't quite make out. But still, there was something about it. It didn't sit right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to sleep, but the strange sensation only grew stronger. And then it happened. As I was lying there, staring at the window, a handprint began to form on the glass. Slowly, it appeared, a dirty, faint handprint, as if someone had pressed their hand against the window from the outside. I froze, my heart racing in my chest. I blinked, hoping it was just my imagination, but no, it was still there, slowly becoming clearer, darker, like it was pressing against the glass right in front of me. I couldn't stay still. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the window, but when I got there, the handprint was gone, completely gone. I checked the glass, touching it with my fingers. Nothing. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space. What was going on? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was I imagining things? Had I been dreaming? It didn't feel like it. This was real. I pulled out my phone, desperate to find that comment again. I opened the Airbnb app and searched for the warning I had seen. Pay attention to the window at night, but it was gone. I couldn't find it anywhere. I scrolled through the reviews again, but nothing. It was like the comment had vanished. I even started to question myself. Had I really seen it in the first place? Was I just making it up? But then, just as I started to feel a little crazy, I heard it. A faint tapping, coming from outside. My stomach turned. Slowly, I crept to the window, my hands shaking. A flash of light, a quick movement, but there was nothing I could make sense of. The tapping stopped. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. Everything seemed normal, but nothing felt normal. It was like there was something I couldn't see. I stepped back, trying to calm myself, but the sense of dread didn't leave. I quickly left the room and went downstairs, hoping that moving around the house would ease my nerves. But no matter how carefully I checked, everything seemed the same. Still, the sounds didn't stop. They came from all over the house, like whispers and soft taps, coming from the walls, from the floor, from somewhere just out of sight. My mind was racing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The fear had taken hold of me. What was happening? That's when I saw it. A figure standing outside the window. A shadow, just like before, but now it was clearer and closer. My heart stopped. I rushed to the door, trying to get outside, my hands trembling as I grabbed my bag. I needed to leave. I needed to get out of there. The panic was overwhelming, but I had to know. I opened the door, my eyes scanning the night, and that's when I saw it. A face. A woman's face. Distorted and decayed, pressed against the glass. I gasped and took a step back, feeling the cold air hit my skin. My breath quickened, and I froze. I was so close to the window now, I could almost feel her there. And then, as quickly as it appeared, the face disappeared. I stood there for a moment, paralyzed. But when I turned back to look at my phone, something else had changed. That comment, the comment, had reappeared. I read it again. Pay attention to the window at night. My blood ran cold. I had seen it before, and now I knew what it meant. But how could that be? The comment had been deleted. How had it come back? What was going on in this place? I couldn't escape the truth. I wasn't alone in this cabin. And whatever was out there, whatever was in that window, wasn't going anywhere. I rented an Airbnb house for a weekend getaway, hoping to escape the hustle and bustle of the city. The idea of a quiet retreat, away from the noise, was exactly what I needed. The house itself was nothing special, at first glance ordinary, even a little worn, but it had a certain charm. The decor was old-fashioned, the kind of place where you can sense the history in the walls. Some corners were a bit neglected, faded from age, but there was something comforting about it. It felt like it had been left untouched for years, a place that hadn't been caught up in the modern rush. Perfect for someone like me, who wanted nothing more than to retreat from the world and find a bit of peace. The first evening, I settled in, taking in the quiet. The view from the window was lovely, rolling hills in the distance, bathed in the warm glow of sunset. It felt peaceful, almost like I'd stepped into another era. Every little detail in the house seemed to tell a story. The old cabinets in the kitchen, the yellowed paint on the walls, the faint smell of something ancient lingering in the air. It was the kind of place you could spend hours just looking around, imagining who had lived there before and what kind of life they had. But nothing about this house would seem out of the ordinary if it weren't for one discovery I made. It was during the second afternoon that I decided to explore the house a little more. I opened drawers in various rooms, not really expecting to find anything of interest. The house was full of old papers, books, and some forgotten personal items. But it wasn't until I found a certain leather-bound journal that everything started to feel off. The journal was worn, the edges of the pages frayed, the leather cover cracked. It looked like it had been through a lot, old, faded, and neglected, but the writing inside was still perfectly legible. I couldn't resist. My curiosity got the best of me, and I started reading. The first few pages were harmless enough. The writer, someone who had lived in the house before, described the rooms, the furniture, the quiet atmosphere. It all seemed pretty normal until I reached the later entries. As I turned the pages, the tone began to shift. The writer started mentioning something strange, something unsettling. They wrote about a visitor who had been coming to the house at night. This visitor didn't knock on the door or announce their presence in any obvious way, but they were there. The writer seemed terrified of them, of the things they did in the dark, the strange happenings that occurred when the visitor was around. I woke up at night and something was moving behind the door. I heard a high-pitched sound, almost like a whisper, and I felt someone breathing. But when I opened my eyes, there was no one there. The words sent a chill through me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the ramblings of someone with an overactive imagination. But something about it stuck with me. As I kept reading, the entries grew even more bizarre. The writer described waking up in the middle of the night to hear knocks on the door, lights flickering on by themselves, and objects moving around the house as if they had a mind of their own. The fear in their words was palpable. They wrote that they never knew who or what was coming to the house at night, but they always felt it. It was as if something invisible was watching them, something that didn't belong. I tried to leave once, but the door wouldn't open. It felt like something was holding it shut, keeping me inside. I don't know how to explain it, but every time I tried, it was like the house itself didn't want me to leave. I couldn't help but feel a growing unease as I read on. This wasn't just some strange coincidence. The writer had been trapped in the house by something that wouldn't let them go. And the worst part was that the entries started to get more desperate, more paranoid. I hear it now, every night. It's getting closer. I can't sleep. The visitor is waiting. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. It's going to find me soon. Then I reached the final page. The last entry was brief, only a few words. It found me. Now it's your turn. As soon as I read those words, a wave of dread washed over me. It wasn't a direct threat, but it felt like one. My heart raced, and I had to put the journal down. I quickly closed it and tried to put it back in the drawer, but something felt off. It was as if that last message wasn't just some random sentence. It was a warning meant for someone who was about to take their place. I felt like I had crossed some line by reading it. That the writer's story wasn't just their own anymore. It was mine now too. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise in the house made me jump. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows, kept me wide awake. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but the more I tried, the more I felt like I was being watched. Around 3 a.m., just as I had started to drift off, I heard it. A faint knock on the door. The same knock the writer had described. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Soft, deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. I sat up in bed, staring at the door, my mind racing. Could it be? Could this really be happening? I didn't want to move, didn't want to acknowledge it, but my body moved on its own. Slowly, I got out of bed and walked toward the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I turned it slowly and pushed the door open, but nothing was there. The hallway was empty, just the silence of the house surrounding me. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But as I stood there, something caught my eye. In the shadows near my bed, I saw a figure. It wasn't clear, not fully, but there was definitely something there. A shape, moving, watching. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step back, my mind racing. Was this the visitor? Was it real? I didn't wait to find out. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut behind me, my pulse racing. I leaned against it, trying to steady my breath, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was inside the house with me. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't relax. Every time I heard a sound, my heart would race. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, but deep down, I knew it was. Whatever the writer had experienced, I was now experiencing it too. I couldn't escape it. The next morning, as soon as the sun came up, I knew I had to leave. I didn't care if it was early. I just needed to get out of that house. I grabbed my things, packed my bag, and went to the door. But as I opened it, I froze. There, on the window, was a faint handprint. It was barely visible, just a smudge of something pressed against the glass. It looked almost like it had been left by a ghostly hand, but it wasn't there when I had arrived. It was as if the visitor had marked me too. I quickly left the house, feeling like I was being watched, like something was still following me. It's been days now, and I can't shake the feeling that the visitor is still out there, waiting. Maybe it's watching me. Maybe it's already here. I don't know what to do, but I feel it. The journal was right now. It's my turn.